Okay, thank you everyone and welcome back. Today, Dr. Beena Jose will deal with synthetic biology and origin of life, which is an important topic in the developments in biological sciences. Although origin of life has been treated in scientific fields for long, this researches and developments with synthetic biology is altogether a new discipline. It is good to be familiarizing ourselves with these latest developments in biological sciences. So, Dr. Sister Beena will be enlightening us with her input initially and later on, and in between also we can have interaction with Sister Beena. Over to you, Sister Beena.
Chemical perspectives on the origin of life and creation of first synthetic cell. One of the existential questions that scientists have pondered since antiquity was life's primordial beginning. How did life originate on Earth? And in order to understand how life originated on Earth, we should know about some of the situations in the early Earth. The Earth was formed as part of solar system some 4.6 billion years ago. Billion means 10 to the power of 9. And between 4.3 to 3.8 billion years ago, Earth is believed to have undergone a period of heavy meteoric bombardment. And because of this heavy meteoric bombardment, planet was in the molten state. And heavier elements like iron, magnesium, zinc, etc. sank to the center. And lighter elements like lithium, helium, etc. rose to the surface, producing Earth's various layers. And early Earth was lifeless, and its atmosphere was dominated with light gases like hydrogen and helium. The planet is believed to have cooled quickly with the formation of solid crust and formation of clouds. And subsequent rains gave rise to oceans, making it a habitable planet. And water provides an excellent environment for the formation of complicated carbon-based molecules like amino acids, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, that could eventually lead to the emergence of life. And it is believed that until 2.4 billion years ago, Earth's atmosphere was mostly devoid of free oxygen. There was no oxygen at that time. And volcanic activity that was very intense. And without an ozone layer, we know that ozone is O3. Since there was no oxygen at that time, no ozone layer. And usually ozone layer hindered the entrance of UV radiation to the Earth's surface. And those days there was no oxygen, no ozone layer, and hence the Earth's atmosphere was flooded with ultraviolet radiation. And the early Earth was just like a chemical factory because the volcanic gases, because of the volcanic activity, a large amount of carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, nitric oxide, nitrogen, water vapor, etc. were released. And moreover, electric discharges, then lightning, radioactivity, and everything. So what happened was that early Earth's atmosphere was just like a huge chemical factory. And the elements in the early Earth's atmosphere, there because of the various kinds of activities, they react to form some basic molecules such as nucleotides, simple proteins, etc. And life on Earth that begins with the synthesis of elements. And the key elements involved in the origin of life are formed by the complex chemical reactions that might have occurred in the course of the stars as well as the course of the Earth. Because in those days, the Earth was in the molten state. And at this enormously high temperature, the nuclear fusion reactions took place. Suppose three helium nuclei, they combine to form carbon nucleus. Then deuterium, helium, oxygen, phosphorus nuclei were formed by these kinds of complex chemical or reaction or by nuclear fusion reaction. And the complex chemical reactions involving hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus eventually led to the formation of biomolecules like amino acids, carbohydrates, nucleic acid, etc., the precursors of the origin of life. And Strecker reaction for the amino acid synthesis and foremost reaction for carbohydrate synthesis were believed to be the front runners for the genesis of biomolecules. A little bit chemistry. Anyway, I'm just giving you an outline of this. Aldehyde, the Strecker reaction, aldehyde that combines with or reacts with potassium cyanide and ammonium chloride to form amino nitrile. Then in presence of acid medium, it gives rise to amino acid. Now, in the foremost reaction, two molecules of formaldehyde that combines to form glycoaldehyde, and this glycoaldehyde again combines with another molecule of formaldehyde through aldol condensation to form glyceraldehyde. And this glyceraldehyde undergoes series of reaction to form ribose. And this reaction is very useful because it explains the path from simple formaldehyde molecule, CH2O, that is formaldehyde, from simple formaldehyde molecule to complex sugars like ribose sugar, the main constituent of RNA. How from the small the formaldehyde molecule, how does it originate or how did it is converted into ribose sugar, that is a pentose sugar, or it is a main constituent of RNA, ribonucleic acid. So amino acids, carbohydrates, nucleic acid, etc. formed by these kinds to form first non-cellular life forms called protobionts. And these protobionts are cell-like large colloidal aggregates, or they are giant molecules containing RNA, protein, polysaccharides, etc. And it seems that the earth was covered with hot, thin soup of water and organic material. We call it as primordial soup. And over time, the molecules in this primordial soup became more and more complex and began to collaborate to run metabolic processes. And eventually, the first cells came into being. And these cells were heterotrophs. Heterotrophs means they could not produce food, or they could not synthesize food by themselves. Rather, they always depend on the organic material from the primordial soup. They did not synthesize their own food. Rather, they depend upon the organic material from the primordial soup. So that's why we call it as heterotrophs. And the anaerobic metabolic processes of the heterotrophs. Anaerobic process means the process which are taking place in the absence of oxygen. I have already mentioned that in the early Earth's atmosphere, there was no oxygen. So, in the absence of oxygen, metabolic processes that taken place, and heterotrophs produced food and released carbon dioxide. And this carbon dioxide is released, and that will help the formation of photosynthetic autotrophs. Because photosynthetic autotrophs means they can synthesize their own food. So these autotrophs, in presence of this carbon dioxide released by heterotrophs, then this carbon dioxide and water vapor, in presence of sunlight and in presence of chlorophyll, they produce their own food and they released oxygen to the atmosphere. So over the subsequent billions of years, the aerobic autotrophs and anaerobic heterotrophs, they became the dominant life forms on the planet. So first heterotrophs and later followed by autotrophs are formed. And these two heterotrophs and autotrophs were the dominant life forms on the earth. So let us come to the different theories on the beginning of life on earth. Theory of special creation. According to this, a god or extraterrestrial beings created the varied forms of life on earth. According to Christian, Jewish, and Islamic belief, God created this universe, planets, plants, animals, and human beings. According to Hindu belief, Lord Brahma, the Lord of creation, made the living world. And the Sikh tradition proposes that all forms of life, including human beings, came into being with a single word of God. The theory of catastrophism, that's actually the modified version of the theory of special creation. And it states that the creation of life by God preceded by a catastrophe. So we know that in catastrophe, there's a complete destruction of the existing life. And new creation consisted of life forms different from that of the previous ones came into being. And then another one is theory of abiogenesis. So abiogenesis is a study of how biological life arises from inorganic matter through natural processes. An example is amino acids, often called the building block of life, that can formed by a series of natural chemical reactions, as demonstrated in Miller-Urey experiment that I will explain later in the following slides. Now, another theory is a theory of spontaneous generation. This is very interesting because until early 19th century, people believed that ongoing spontaneous generation of certain forms of life from non-living or inanimate matter. And Aristotle, he was a proponent of this particular theory, and it was a readily observation that flies arise from putrid matter or mice from dirty hay. So this is an example for spontaneous generation. But in the 19th century, Louis Pasteur, he disapproved this notion of spontaneous generation, and he stated that spontaneous generation is a dream. And you might have heard about the famous swan neck experiment, Louis Pasteur's swan neck experiment. And one second. And that means life arises from pre-existing life, not from non-living material. That means, for example, spider lays eggs which develop into spiders. Bacterial cells come from other bacterial cells. And one second. Now, this is his famous swan neck experiment. And here you can see that the broth that was taken and it is boiled to expel the microorganisms present in it. And in order to sterilize it, it was boiled. And it is protected from external environment by means of this curved neck. And whereas these two flowers, the curved neck is removed, and here the microorganism grow in the broth. So he concluded that some elements were needed to give rise to life. In other words, life does not arise spontaneously. So he demonstrated that bacterial cells must come from other bacterial cells, disapproving that all life originated spontaneously. He disapproved that notion of spontaneous generation. And here, these two flasks, this broth has direct contact with the external environment. And because of that, this microorganism grow in this broth, whereas here, no such growth of the microorganisms. And according to his theory, biogenesis, always life arises from pre-existing life, not from non-living material. Then another theory is the theory of panspermia, that some scientists believe that simplest life forms have been transported to the earth from extraterrestrial sources. That means life might have originated from some other extraterrestrial planets or sources, and it might have brought to the Earth's surface by means of meteoric bombardment. And the meteorites which were discovered or it was found in Mexico showed the presence of water and amino acids. So it was believed that life might have originated in some other planets or some other extraterrestrial sources, and it is brought into Earth's surface by means of this kind of meteoric bombardments. And then inorganic incubation, that's another theory. And this theory states that instead of the building blocks of life forming first, then forming the cell-like structure, cell came first and was later filled with living molecules. And they claim that first cells were not living cells, but inorganic ones made of iron sulfide and were formed not at Earth's surface, but in total darkness at the bottom of the oceans. So these are different theories on the beginning of life on Earth. And another theory is marine theory. And according to this theory, life may have begun at the marine hydrothermal vents. And these vents are rich in chemical and thermal energy that sustains vibrant ecosystem. But how at this very high temperature, how could the life survive? Especially the protein molecule, etc., or amino acids, and this high temperature that would accelerate the breakdown of amino acids and proteins. The proponent of this organic evolution. And evolutionists, they change over time in one or more inherited traits found in populations of organisms and passed from one generation to the next generation. Then another one is electric spark theory, that electric sparks can generate amino acids and sugars from an atmosphere loaded with water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen. And it was shown in the Miller-Urey experiment reported in 1953 that I will explain soon after this. Now, RNA world hypothesis. RNA is a single-stranded molecule, whereas DNA is double-stranded. And in the case of DNA require proteins for its synthesis, and proteins require DNA for its synthesis, and both require RNA. So when we consider DNA, proteins, and RNA might have formed first because it is the simplest form. But in the case of RNA, how this RNA formed? It always requires some components, no? Because it is made up of nucleotides. So metabolism first or RNA first? Again, there is a sort of confusion. Then chemo-autotrophic origin of life. Autotrophs. Autotrophs are organisms, they are capable of synthesizing their own food from inorganic materials using light and chemical energy. And chemo-autotrophs means they could synthesize their own food by making use of chemical energy. For example, this energy which is released because of the chemical reaction of iron sulfide and hydrogen sulfide, iron pyrite is formed and a lot of energy is released, and that energy can be utilized for the synthesis of their own food. And such kind of organism, they are called chemo-autotrophs. And when we come to the, this is a little bit chemistry, iron sulfide and hydrogen sulfide, that combination, that's a strong reducing agent, and or it is a rich source of electrons for the reduction of organic compounds. And also it promotes the formation of peptide bonds present in protein molecule. And this reaction can be considered as the primordial initiation reaction for the chemo-autotrophic origin of life. Then we come to the modern theory of origin of life. So these were so many theories, no? And this is the last one, that's modern theory of origin of life. And this theory that was proposed independently by two scientists, Oparin, Russian scientist in 1923, and Haldane, an English scientist in 1928. And according to this theory, the first life forms were not able to synthesize their own food, or we call it as heterotrophs, but they depend always on the pre-existing organic compounds of abiotic origin. So we call it as heterotrophs and always depends upon the organic material from the primordial soup. And this theory that was experimentally tested by Stanley Miller and Harold Urey in 1953. So let us come to various steps of the modern theory of the origin of life. First is formation of complex organic molecules from simpler inorganic molecules through chemical reactions. So the early atmosphere, the atmosphere contained ammonia, methane, water vapor, and there was no free oxygen. And the earth cooled down and it developed a solid crust. And as the earth's surface cooled to 50 to 60 degrees Celsius, molecules and minerals present in water bodies combined to form simple organic compounds, simple sugars, and amino acids. And Haldane proposed that these simple organic compounds then accumulated in water bodies, forming a primordial soup. Small organic compounds, they dissolved in water to form primordial soup. And this is a case of the early Earth's atmosphere. Carbon dioxide, methane, nitrogen, nitric oxide, hydrogen cyanide, acetylene, and all these compounds were there in the atmosphere. Moreover, electric, lightning, ultraviolet radiation. And so this early Earth's atmosphere was just like a big chemical factory. And a lot of chemical reactions might have happened there. And small simple molecules, they are converted into more complex molecules, amino acids, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, and a simple form of these compounds that dissolve in water to form prebiotic soup. So the Haldane soup, simple molecules were there. They then later form complex molecule and they accumulate to form aggregates or microspheres. And the microspheres they form protocells, and the protocells combined with nucleic acid forming a cell. So the natural selection was in operation even in that time of at the time of origin of life. And the continued selection of more successful pre-cell or eobionts accompanied with the perfection of membrane system that led to the formation of first cell. And for a long period, the life on Earth that mainly consisted of bacteria, molds, cyanide, blue-green algae, etc. And let us come to Miller-Urey experiment. And Stanley Miller from Chicago University, they tested the operant Haldane theory and successfully produced organic compounds from inorganic compounds. So they established the early Earth's condition in the laboratory. And from simple molecules, they produced complex organic molecules like amino acids, hydroxy acids, and urea. Let us see this experiment here. Water molecule, then methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and carbon monoxide. And they passed electric discharge through this, and chemical reactions took place, and the product was amino acid. And in the Miller-Urey experiment, amino acids, building block of proteins, were synthesized. And this showed that if we establish primordial Earth conditions in the laboratory, we could synthesize this kind of complex molecules from simple molecule or from simple starting material. And let us come to the limitations of this Miller-Urey experiment. Here, in the early Earth's atmosphere, it was rich in the components of the volcanic gases that include carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and water vapor. So few scientists have contradicted that the gases hydrogen, methane, and ammonia used by Miller and Urey are not as abundant as shown in the experiment. Because the early Earth's atmosphere that was rich in carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, water vapor, etc. But in the Miller-Urey experiment, we have used methane, ammonia, hydrogen, water, etc. But this methane and ammonia, all those compounds were not that much abundant in the Earth's atmosphere at that time. That was the claim of some of the scientists. Few scientists claimed like that. And in the experiment, another point is that they carried out this experiment at a very high temperature. So how could the protein sustain, or how can they exist in that particular high temperature? Usually proteins remain biologically active, either just the active above 50 degree. Very few proteins become biologically active above 50 degree or below 30 degree. So at this very high temperature in the early Earth's atmosphere, it's very difficult for the protein or amino acids to exist because they get destroyed at that high temperature. And another objection is that the early Earth's atmosphere that was flooded with UV radiation, and this UV radiation that is toxic to life. And Miller's 1953 experiment was followed a few years later. Oro and Kimball synthesized adenine. Adenine, that is a nitrogenous base found in DNA, and they synthesized the adenine by the polymerization of hydrogen cyanide under basic conditions. So these experiments follow a generalization that if this can happen in the lab, this could have occurred in a similar way in the primitive Earth atmosphere. And researchers were able to synthesize the biomolecules like proteins, polysaccharides, RNA in the lab by establishing primordial Earth condition. But how life originates from these non-living molecules by chemical processes or any other phenomenon, that is a mystery beyond our comprehension. Because these non-living molecules like proteins or polysaccharides or RNA, they do not symbolize life. And there is a definite gap exists between these non-living molecules and living beings. So the origin of life, that is an unsolved puzzle. How living organism came into existence out of non-living matter, and how the first living cell could have appeared in the primordial atmosphere on the Earth. So Russian biologist Alexander I. Oparin, in his book, The Origin of Life, he published in 1936, and he commented, unfortunately, however, the problem of the origin of life is perhaps the most obscure point in the whole study of the evolution of organisms. Professor Klaus Doss from the University of Johannes Gutenberg states, more than 30 years of experimentation on the origin of life have led to a better perception of the immensity of the problem of the origin of life on Earth rather than to its solution. And geochemist Jeffrey Beena from San Diego-based Scripps Institute. Today, as we leave the 20th century, we still face the biggest unsolved problem that we had when we entered the 20th century. How did life originate on Earth? So the origin of life, that is literally a problem with no end in sight. And we will not encounter a unique solution that satisfactorily explain the beginning of life at the molecular level. So life is far more complex than Miller believed. So in the summary of the famous Miller-Urey origin of life experiment, Horgan concluded that Miller's results at first seemed to provide stunning evidence that life could arise from primordial soup. In fact, almost 40 years after his original experiment, Miller told me that solving the riddle of the origin of life had turned out to be more difficult than he or anyone else had envisioned. So, despite many years of careful and persistent efforts, scientists are unable to find out the exact point where and how life began. So I have already told you about this Antony Flew, and he was a famous British philosopher and world's famous atheist and champion for unbelievers for decades. And in his book, God and Philosophy, he concluded the universe itself is ultimate. In other words, nature explains everything and there is no need to believe in any sort of creator. But in 2004, he shocked the world by announcing that he had come to believe in God. And in 2007, he recounted his conversion in the book, There's a God, How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind. And at the age of 81, he came to believe in God. And he said that the origin of life cannot be explained from a biological standpoint. There must be something, there must be some intelligent design or super intelligence. So the amazing complexity of even the simplest cell or the information bearing properties of DNA or the fine tuning of the laws and constants of physics that make organic life possible, these are the signs of intelligence. So this super intelligence is only good explanation for the origin of life and complexity of nature, Flew said. So before moving to the creating life from the lab, shall we go
Yeah,
for this?
sure. We can have an interaction at this point.
Yeah.
There is one question in the chat box.
Okay,
You can
no.
say that, no?
There are several questions, I think. Maybe I'm saying, okay.
No, only one question. Yeah, couple of questions.
Am I the only? Oh, you sorry. Okay. Assisting and reconnecting. Connected and viewing. What that's a question?
Were there any? Let us see.
Okay.
Where is
I'm,
it?
I couldn't see that.
Today, new message for me. Am I the only one? Try.
No, it's not.
There was a question from Alan. You are there. Alan had posted a question. I don't find it now.
Yes, but I deleted it when she actually, the lecturer actually spoke about it, right? That the origin of life is not certain. We do not know how it.
Okay.
So actually,
Okay. Yes, Aaron. Aaron's question was, can
yeah.
animate life originate from inanimate matter? I hope you are answered, especially with
Yes,
Urey-Miller experiment.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. Anybody else, any clarification or comments you wish to make?
Sister, I have a comment.
Yeah.
And everything has a cause. Nothing will come by itself. So there is a creator. For example, if you have a table has a creator, the carpenter.
Yeah.
So in the sense that you have concluded that at the end of the conclusion, you said that super intelligence. So there is a kind of a, because scientifically in the laboratory, origin of life cannot be proved, right?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
And so end of the time, there is a creator. Even the last slide you show,
Yeah.
atheist who has become
Yeah. Believer.
yeah. So I think I think that looks more rational to me,
Yeah.
because every human being has there's a creator. Nothing can come by itself.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there has to be the primary cause.
Yes.
Yep. In fact, thank you for that comment, Christopher. In fact, your thinking is very straightforward. That is very good. Principle of causality is very much recognized in the science-religion dialogue. But we should also know that there are limits to applying this principle of causality to ultimate origins. In order to avoid the fallacy of infinite regress, we are invoking an uncaused cause, unmoved mover. You know, David Hume has vehemently refuted all the arguments from the principle of causality which Saint Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle had proposed. So you say that there is order, there must be ordainer. Then there cannot be disorder in the universe. You say there is a cause for everything, say just as a carpenter is there for a table. Then you must also invoke causality for God also. As Richard Dawkins and companions would argue, the question of as to who created God is important. Logically, we have the answer that the creator cannot be created. He should be an uncreated creator. So logically, David Hume has found out loopholes with all these arguments from design, argument from causality, the scope for miracles, purpose, and so on. So I would respectfully request that I fully agree with you, Christopher, that there must be causality, but our argument should not be limited to inferring the causality from our phenomenological observations, because the debate over causality has gone far beyond the direct observation of causality. Say, for instance, in quantum mechanics, causality itself is challenged. Ex nihilo nihil fitum. This is a Democritan dictum, but even that principle is challenged as though something is appearing out of nothing everywhere. So the conventional classical understanding of causality cannot be defended in the context of the contemporary physics and cosmology. That limitations, but this is a very hot debate. Many in quantum mechanics also are arguing that causality still does hold, despite the apparent lack of causality in the quantum world. Anyway, this is a hot area. In our final course on the special questions in science religion dialogue, we will have an input on miracles, causality, connecting all this. We will revisit David Hume, and from the contemporary scientific point of view, we will be responding to the critique over causality and miracles by David Hume. In the context of the contemporary scientific and biological worldview, how should we understand causality? How can we protect the idea of God as the first cause? Anyway, it is important to recognize the complexity of complexity of the debate over causality in the contemporary science religion dialogue. That's all what I wanted to call your attention to at the moment, Christopher.
And yeah.
Yes, sister, you wish to add something more, please?
There is another question. Is there any comment on the soul being the origin of life when it comes to human being? Is there any comment on the soul being the origin of life when it comes to human being? Actually, Plato's the theory of soul. It can be there is three parts of the soul. That's rational part, high-spirited part, and appetitive part of the soul. And rational means a logical part. That's thinking part of the soul. And high-spirited means the temperament that determines the temperament. And appetitive part, that is part of the soul by which we experience hunger, thirst, etc. But at what stage of the origin of life the soul came into human being? That's a very difficult question, I think. And soul is actually the essence of humanity's being, who we are. But exactly at what stage it comes to the life of the human person, I'm not sure about it. Father, could you please?
Maybe, Habib, I am wondering whether do you have in mind the Christian understanding of the ensoulment? That is to say, the Christian response, especially the Catholic response to the theory of evolution, has been that although the human body is physically evolved, it is very likely that God inserts soul into the physical body at the moment of fertilization. Is that what you mean in your question, Habib? Would you like to shed some more light as to the background of your question?
Yeah, thank you so much, Father. So actually, it is from that perspective of when the human is being formed within the mother's womb, maybe there is a stage where maybe the soul is what is imparted in
Yeah, thank you, Habib. Thank you for that clarification. In that regard, I must respond it likewise. This idea of the ensoulment of the human body by direct insertion of the soul from above by God at the moment of fertilization was articulated first in the Humanae Generis, the encyclical by Pope Pius VI, I think, or Pius X. Kindly check that later. In 1955, I think. You know, our anthropology was, or science was not anything well developed at that time. Nearly 7-8 decades have gone since the publication of the Humanae Generis. Now, in 1994, addressing the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, John Paul II said that theory of evolution is more than a hypothesis. This is now a theory. Pope John Paul II did not take recourse to the doctrine of ensoulment in order to defend the Christian doctrine. Okay, so that Pope Humanae Generis was the first response of the church towards theory of evolution, and the second and more authentic response came from John Paul II. See, the present understanding of the ensoulment is that we are rediscovering that holistic understanding of human soul. In fact, the original idea of the soul in the Hebrew Old Testament has been that they are united. Not that soul is entering the body, rather body is in the soul, the primacy of the mind, the primacy of the spirit. Therefore, the same word like bara, nefesh, they were used for referring to the material and the spiritual, the flesh and the spirit alike in the Old Testament. So the dualistic understanding of the New Testament with regard to body-soul relationship was not there in the Old Testament. Only under the influence of the Greek philosophy upon the New Testament, as a result of the entanglement of the Christian theology with the Western Greek dualistic metaphysics, did this body-soul dualism creep in Christian theology. Therefore, the debate has been completely hijacked from a different point of view. Nowadays, theologians are revisiting that old idea of the holistic integration of the body-soul unity as is originally conceived in the biblical tradition. Given that scenario, a sort of insertion from above appears to be very, very artificial. No such artificial transcendental insertion of soul in human body is necessary now, because matter itself, not only when we humans are fertilized, from the very beginning of the origin of matter, matter is a form of spirit. That is more metaphysical. When we dealt with the physics, we saw ultimately even Big Bang originated from the Higgs field. And the way Gregory of Nyssa thought of the Higgs field, not exactly his field, the original matter emerging from God's energy. Consciousness is primary. There is a lot of research taking place with regard to the relationship between matter and mind. Nowadays, panpsychism perspectives are gaining the upper hand in the debate over the relationship between matter and mind, panpsychism, which holds that everything is framed out of mind. Materialists have been arguing that consciousness emerged from the complexity of matter. Now the idea has been reversed now. That is to say, matter has been carved out of consciousness. Say, for example, Bernard d'Espagne, the renowned French physicist. All the developments putting together them, we get, it is a very self-imposing idea that matter must have been a byproduct of the complex interaction of consciousness with the matrix, with physical stuff, it seems. Okay, the complexity of the interaction in consciousness or in the field and energy is resulting in the production of matter itself. So we have some indication in contemporary physics, in contemporary neuroscience, and also in evolutionary biology as to the primacy of consciousness. If consciousness or mind can be analogically similar to the spirit or soul, ensoulment from above is unnecessary, which would mean every being, even matter, is endowed with a germinal form of consciousness. This idea has been articulated by several theologians, say, for example, Teilhard de Chardin, and many other theologians also. In mystical traditions, this is very strong. In the Eastern religious traditions, Hindu philosophy, Jainist philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, Taoism, this is a central idea, the primacy of the Chit's consciousness. So we need to be appropriating the idea of the ensoulment from a radically different framework altogether. Maybe in the special questions, we can revisit this question. I only wanted to bring your attention to this latest debate over ensoulment in the context of the theory of evolution, origin of life, origin of matter, and so. Okay. Of course, these perspectives have not become the mainstream approach of the teachings of even of the Christian churches, but I myself have been part of this sort of a debate in Vatican. Okay, so Catholic theologians are open to this kind of ideas, I know. Of course, this has not trickled down to the catechism of the church as of now. So may I invite, who raised the hand first, I think. Before Jerry, somebody had raised a hand, no? Jeremiah, I think Jeremiah raised a hand. Jeremiah, do you wish to make an intervention now?
Yeah, thank you. I think partly my question is answered.
Okay, thank you, Jeremiah.
Because I wanted to know whether the theories we've listened from science, even from theology and philosophy, can we say even up to now we don't have a definite theory that we can hold on the creation?
Creation of life or the creation of the world?
Of life, yes. Creation of
that's
life.
what sister confirmed that, no? This still remains an enigma, a mystery.
Yeah.
That is true.
Father, one more question there.
Yeah.
Is there a common agreed definition of life? Actually, life, it looks very simple, but it's very perplexing and complexing question, or it's a complex approach. Because, what is love and what is happiness? Likewise, what is life? It's very difficult to give a definite definition for life. But we can say it has different dimension. The biological sense, we would say that, it's made up of life. The biological bioactive molecule or biomolecules will create life, or that is responsible for the synthesis of life, etc. And the theological sense, we will say God is the author of life. And in the philosophical way, we will say the transcendental nature of life. But we could not say a definite, correct definition for life. But we can say some of the characteristics of life, like growth, reproduction, metabolic activities, etc. So it's very difficult to give us a particular definite definition for it, but it's a mystery. It's a mystery beyond our
Sister Beena, am I right to assume, Sister Beena, am I right to assume that scientists consider movement as the fundamental property of life? Even the first organic cell that was formed, it obtained the property of self-replication and thereby movement. In philosophy and science, there is a common consensus that mobility or movement self by itself is considered as a fundamental property of life. Is there anything that is contradicting in contemporary science, biology?
No, it's actually characteristics of life is a movement, that's a growth, then reproduction and metabolic processes. So the movement is the important thing. Even now, that's the main characteristics of life. Even
Okay,
though,
sister. Maybe
yeah.
you could pick up the second part of Robert Graff's question also. You can see there, no?
Yes, is there any clear boundary between organic chemicals and life? No, organic chemicals are there, just chemicals only. They are not life form. They are just non-living. For example, if we take amino acids or amino acids like alanine, phenylalanine, tryptophan, valine, so many things. So we can just put it in the bottles and keep it in the lab. So they are just they are organic molecules because they contain carbon, but they are all having no life. They are having no life. Similarly, if we take this one, carbohydrates like, what is that? That is glucose, fructose, sucrose, all those sugars. They are all chemicals or they are all organic molecules, but having no life. But life is something different from non-living biomolecules. Biomolecule, they are the building block of life, but they have no life, but they are the building block actually, because the living organisms are made up of amino acids, mostly of the proteins. Proteins are made up of amino acids, but this amino acid or protein, they do not have life. So one is, there's a definite gap exists between this living molecule, living beings and the non-living molecule. So we cannot say any definite boundary. What's a clear boundary?
Maybe I will add just one comment more to
Yes.
Graf's question. Bob, I think this very approach itself may be questionable by science itself. Of course, there are chemical foundations for life, but scientific community itself is, many in the scientific community themselves are uncomfortable with this sort of analytical and reductionistic approach to life. Is it the right strategy? Is this the right approach for exploring the origin of life? Going into the microscopic world? That strategy itself may be questionable. Of course, in philosophy, we say the whole is more than the parts. Phase transitions, there are many. Water is formed out of hydrogen and oxygen. Both are gaseous elements. But when water is formed, this is in liquid form. This is a phase transition. Certainly, there must be several phase transitions that life itself will have undergone in the process of evolution. Nature does not operate linearly. Linear operation is 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1, 3, 3 plus 1, 4, 4 plus 1, 5. 5 plus 1 for nature need not always be 6. It can be 60, 600, 6,000. This is exponential leap. Therefore, chemistry being the foundation of life doesn't mean that chemistry is the totality of life. We can only say bios is related with chemicals. But bios considered as a whole is more than the sum of its parts. Whole is more than the parts. So this reductionistic and analytical approach itself may be questioned in future. Probably this is the reason, one of the reasons why biology has got stuck up with the enigma of life. We may altogether require a completely different approach itself towards life. Anyway, as of now, this is the only approach that we have also. Of course, philosophers have, that is why we should put together both philosophy and theology also, along with the sciences for the understanding of the mystery of life. In theology and philosophy, we have a completely different appropriation of life. Okay. Then, Jerry, you raised your hand a little.
Yes,
Jerry,
yes,
please
Father.
make your comment. Yeah. Kindly unmute yourself. Yeah.
Thomas Nagel is a famous philosopher in the United States, and he wrote a famous book about consciousness. And he said you can't explain the mind with physical properties. Are you aware of his work, Father?
Are you referring to, what is the second name, Professor Thomas?
He wrote a book on the consciousness of a bat. that you can't explain consciousness through
Yeah.
physics.
Exactly. I could not recollect the author, but this idea I am familiar. In the debates over consciousness, this batch issue is very, very strong.
Yeah.
Batch consciousness, yeah.
But he said the physics can't explain consciousness or the mind. So the question of the mind, following up with Teilhard, the idea of complexification of consciousness, that as matter becomes more complex, mind emerges. So it's an emergent property, not something that's created de novo by. That's my understanding of Teilhard.
Very good, very good.
Your understanding also?
Sure. I very much share that opinion, but we need more and more proofs for that. All these ideas are still half science baked in philosophy. Okay, of course, an topic like a consciousness never be fully explained by science, by scientific method. Therefore, we will need this sort of hermeneutical and speculative freedom in understanding consciousness. Even his arguments, Thomas's arguments also are partly speculative. That is the limitation of. Perhaps that is the strength of these arguments also. We need to be aware of that fact also. Yes, please, Ferdinand Miyawa.
Some philosophers claim.
Jerry, please continue. Jerry, Ferdinand,
some philosophers are claiming there is a kind of a universal conscious. Teilhard's idea of.
Oh, sure. There are many in the philosophical circle holding that opinion.
Is an example of there may be.
Okay, thank you, Jerry, for those additional comments. Ferdinand, over to you.
Now, we have got scientific medication upon which when one becomes sick, you are prescribed certain types of medicine that science proves that will heal. Now, this medicine, before it gets into the body, it is more of an unliving thing because it cannot survive and it has got an expiry. But once it gets into the body cells, it becomes alive. It reignites. It finds its purpose in the life of a human being. So now I'm trying to look at it this way. Whatever is created scientifically comes as a knowledge from here or from that force that cannot be moved, cannot be formed, cannot be created, because it's a knowledge that you cannot hold physically, but something that is perceived, which puts a scientist into an experiment of producing, manufacturing some combination of chemicals that when swallowed, when it gets into the body, it reactivates the body cells of the living being, and also the medicine must find life, because you cannot save where you do not have life. So the medicine must get its power life from an existing human being to enable the drug to work effectively.
Very good. Thanks for that comment. Sister Beena, would you like to respond to this comment?
So, that means when the medicine, enter into the body, the cells will respond. Is that he asked?
Yeah, basically, I think what Ferdinand was telling us that our intervention is part of the processes of the promotion of life. Say, for example, medicine's interaction with the body and life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, therefore, not only the chemical grounds of life, but the interactive dimension, the interconnected holistic dimension of life also is important. So I would certainly endorse your opinion, Ferdinand, that is to say, even while we apply medicine we develop medicine, we only discover that. This is also no original invention that we are making. Humans only discover, no invention, we say, no. That is the case with medicine also. Again, we are underscoring here again the natural primacy or enigma of life, even in the intersection between medicine and life. Okay, that would be my short response.
Yeah.
Christopher has this question. Is there any theory of the origin of God? This is a philosophical question. Christopher, there is no theory of the origin of God, because the very concept origin of God is a logical contradiction. If we coin the term God, by definition, God is eternal. Eternity can have no beginning or end. Therefore, we should have a completely different understanding of God. God is not bound by space and time. If we say origin of God, God only becomes something like a creature. So this is the intrinsic logical problem, that in classical philosophy, in classical logic, God can have no origin and no end. Therefore, asking for God's origin will not be becoming to the classical understanding of the definition of God. Of course, recent debates have something else, especially in non-causality, eternity, and so on. Anyway, as of now, this question was asked to Saint Augustine: what was your God doing before he created the world? Was he sleeping? You say your God created the world. Then what was he doing before he created the world? Augustine gave this response: before creating the world, God was creating hell for people, stupid people asking this kind of funny questions. Augustine said this question is nonsensical. That was what he meant, because this question presupposes time. Time began only with creation. God is beyond creation. God is beyond time. Therefore, in philosophy, recollecting over the origin of God is problematic. However, atheists are raising this question again and again. Then where does your God come from? In order to avoid the fallacy of infinite regress, you are invoking the uncaused cause. Then where does this uncaused cause come from? That is based on an irrational understanding of, wrong idea of God. That is how theists would respond to that. Wycliffe, Sister Beena, you can see that, no?
Yes. Wycliffe Musinga, I
Ah.
believe that all living organisms share several key characteristics or functions, functions such as order, sensitivity or response to environment, reproduction, growth and development, regulation, hemostasis, and energy processing. When viewed together, these characteristics serve to define life. Yes, these are characteristics and they serve to define life. Thank you, Wycliffe, for your comment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this should be put together with our discussion on the definition of life. Yeah, this is the biologically accepted conditions for or characteristics of life in biology. Okay, thank you, Wycliffe. Anybody else, any comment? Ferdinand, I think we already responded to. Maybe you can lower your hand now, I think. And there are a couple of comments also. Where is that? This is a great presentation. Great presentation, and it is very important to notice that Sister has really a great comprehensive understanding of the topic. Thank you. Maybe you wish to thank them, Sister Beena. That is from Jane and
thank you, Sister Jane.
William Odeyaba. Okay.
Lawrence Godfrey. Yeah,
great. Is there a common agreed? I think we took up all.
Yes,
questions.
last one more is there. A kind request from Professor to explain both life and death. Oh, because of both of two are created. Kind request from Professor to explain both life and death. Because both of two are created.
This is more a philosophical question. Anything scientific you wish to add, Sister Beena, you may shed light. Then I can add something from the philosophical point of view.
About life and death. How could this,
you explained how life originated. Do you have any
uh,
scientific, biological explanation as to how death occurs? Anything scientifically you wish to add, say about deaths?
how death occurs? Anyway, we could not. We can extend life. That only, but we cannot prevent death. We cannot prevent death, but we can extend our life or prolong our life by suitable means that I have already discussed in the last class, no? The reversal of aging and all. But, the philosophical aspect, I do not know.
Yeah, okay. Sekalala Fahad, thanks for this question. When we say life and deaths, of course, we say there is life after life. Hence, there is the mechanism of death, we could say. Death itself is a mystery. We do not know what is there after death. Going by the evolutionary mechanism, there are philosophers and theologians arguing that death is not the termination of the scientific understanding of life. Rather, death itself is a phase transition in life. Phase transition, Phasa, transition from one stage to the next stage. So as I commented in my previous explanation, life itself has undergone several transitions from one phase to the other. Sister very well explained the transition from the physical matter. Physical evolution first, organic compounds. From the elementary particles were formed first. When we dealt with the Big Bang theory, we had seen that anthropic principle, the birth of life and the birth of humans themselves were preconceived in the Big Bang itself. That is the anthropic principle. So, firstly, the transition of life from the physical stuff to the chemical stuff, from the chemical to the organic, then from the organic to the complex organic, then to the bacterial or the microscopic. Then we have the complex forms of life. Say, if you read Richard Dawkins' words, one interesting observation that he makes is that although life was there on the surface of the earth for over 4 billion years, for 320 crores years, that is 3.2 billion years of the history of life, there was only bacteria. Only in the last 80 million years, there were complex organisms. This is another phase transition that life has undergone. Phase transition, the violation of the law of nature from linear, to the non-linear, from the orderly to the disorderly or the chaotic. But that chaos is always for the betterment. That is how nature makes exponential leaps. We humans share 99% of genes with the chimpanzees. We have just 1% of extra genes compared to the chimpanzee. Nature added 1 to 99. Humans evolved out of the chimpanzee. But is it just 1% difference between humans and the chimpanzee? This is the phase transition that we are speaking about. This is not a linear transition, completely different exponential transition we find here. Similarly, human is not necessarily the end of the life. No, human is not the best that nature can produce. This can go to another phase. Of course, in interaction with the science and technology and so on, in Theardian terms, human beings are evolution becoming conscious of itself. Post-humans may occur. That is another area. Now, with regard to death, understanding deaths, We do not know what this death altogether. Biologically speaking, there are many theologians and philosophers arguing that death itself could be another stage in the various self-transitions that life is embracing. Death is such a way, a transition, another transition for exponential phase transition for the evolutionary mechanism of life for the better. As of now, we have seen only quantitative leaps for life in the 14 billion year old history of life, not just the 4 billion year old history. There were only 4 going to the idea of the anthropic principle. We must say life origin, the Big Bang itself was responsible for the origin of life. To this date, there was only quantitative explanations and transitions for life. Now, with this enormous complexity of life with the human brain, probably it is time for life to make another transition to the qualitative. That is where Southern's theology is very helpful for us. Life should move on to the omega point. Also, please recollect what we said about Frank Tipler, the physics of immortality. Not from the faith or dogmatic point of view, but from the perspective of the contemporary laws of thermodynamics and physics. He is explaining the physics of immortality as to death as not the end of life. Life is capable of surviving the tragedy, if at all this is considered a tragedy. That is a negative term in our explanation. Okay, life will be able to overcome the challenge of deaths. Life will go on. Even the world might end in heat death or cold death, old theory, big rip, big crunch, world might end, but no, life can overcome even the big whimper and the big rip, it seems, because life in the final stage of the evolution will have obtained real qualitative properties whereby it can survive without a body. It can be, the entire universe can be engulfed with life alone. That life will be totally different from the sort of life that we are speaking about today. That life, as for that life, death will not be the final word. Of course, this is what theology is basically promising us. As for our quantitative life, there will be a qualitative, not just physically extension, but a qualitative enhancement, qualitative promotion or transformation that we call the eternal life. That is from the faith point of view. This is where science, theology, intersection becomes important. So our theological understanding of the eternity of life is analogically or partly warranted or justified or endorsed by the evolutionary phase transitional understanding of life, we could say. I wish to add this point to your question. Okay.
Further, one more question is it okay if I said that the origin of human beings is non-existence?
From non-existence.
No.
Human beings is from non-existent. Probably that is the presupposition. Khalifa, would you like to clarify that question? Did you mean to say that human beings originated out of nothing? Is that your point? Maybe Khalifa is off the mic. We would assume that Khalifa means human beings were created out of nothing. Anyway, this is not the understanding of the Judeo-Christian tradition, that the world was originated out of nothing. Not the human beings. As at least in the Jewish and Christian tradition, he was formed out of the clay, isn't it? So, origin of the human beings, certainly I think Islamic tradition also is following this point. As I said earlier, we will have more inputs from the multi-religious point of view at the end of our course. Okay. Anyway, as of now, neither in theology nor in science, the origin of humans are considered to be origin out of nothing. From the scientific point of view, in all our discussions in the history of the science-religion dialogue, in the biological sciences, it is very clear that humans are the product of evolution. Okay, biology very well confirms the biological continuity of species. Rather than spoiling the dignity of human beings from its evolution due to from the monkeys, it only enhances the dignity of the humans. Maybe in our special questions, we will have more inputs on theology of evolution. There we will revisit this debate over the dignity of humans and evolution. Anyway, we can almost with some certainty say that neither theological nor scientific to say that origin of humans is from non-existence or out of nothing. Okay, anything else?
No other questions, Father.
I think we had a great session.
No,
Sister Beena, I think we should defer our next topic, synthetic biology. That will take quite a bit of time, no? If we begin today, we will not be able to complete that. Maybe we can keep it for the next session, not necessarily next Friday. For next Friday, assuming that we will complete with, I have scheduled something, we can discuss when we can schedule that, I think.
Yeah.
Is that fine with you?
Yes, it will not take 1.5 hours. This no, the only small portion is there. So if you schedule it for next day, I know I don't have to that 1.5
Maybe
hours.
you have an anthropological session, no? Along with that, we can do that session. Time doesn't matter. Even if it is for just 30 minutes, that is perfectly fine. Okay. Or 2 inputs we can have in one session with another topic.
Yep.
Because anyway, I do not wish to extend beyond 9:30.
Okay,
That is it.
Yes, fine.
Then if you have no further question, I think we will wind up 10 minutes ahead of schedule. Thank you for everyone's interaction and participation.